become so vivid that you start believing them and you start bringing them into discussions that, oh, something happened to me, but it actually didn't happen. And that is called a false memory. And your brain, no matter how sophisticated it has this fault of creating false memories. Now, if you look into the human body, there are 3 places where memories form. You have got muscle memory. Some people learn a piano, and after some time, you notice that they remember where to put their fingers at. Why? Well, first of all, their brain formed new neurons, new connections. Second, the muscles now remember where to put the fingers. So when you play an instrument, your muscles also contribute. They have their own memory. The brain also is, of course, the champion of all of them. The cerebral cortex is the region in the brain where there is the memory center. The most important and emotional memories, they are stored in that region. And the most amazing fact that you are going to learn today is that memories are also stored in your genome. Did you know that memories can actually be transferred from ancestors to offspring? So, some memories that you have might not actually be yours. They have come from one of your parents or grandparents. Someone in your family history has learned something, and this memory was transferred into you. And these memories can come in different forms and shapes. The skills. Some people are so good at learning how to play a musical instrument without so much training. Why? Because one of their members of the family history has learned it. It became imprinted into their genome, and now it's transferred across generations. And there was a recent study on animal models that showed that these memories can be transferred across 14 generations, and that's actually a lot. So remember, when you learn a new skill, the chances are that it might be transferred into one of your future generations. So make sure that you learn some good skills. Now, how many of you are afraid of spiders? Please raise your hand. That's a lot of people. And how many are afraid of heights? Also. How many are afraid of both? Yeah, very few. Now, it turned out, according to neuroscientists, that phobias might also be inherited memories. One of your ancestors was exposed to a spider and developed the fear of spider because of a bad experience, and that experience was imprinted into the genome, and now it's being transferred across generations. So you are born afraid of something you haven't encountered in your life because someone else had. The other thing that genetic memories are important for is survival. Now, why would you be afraid of spiders? Because whoever was afraid of spiders before you now knows to avoid spiders. Maybe they are venomous spiders and you want to avoid their bites. So it's a survival instinct now. It's becoming a survival instinct to help you avoid getting into bad situations once again. One of the amazing things about genetic memory is that sometimes traumatic experiences, somebody who was exposed to sexual abuse in the childhood, this would leave a huge emotional memory which could be imprinted into the genome, and it could now be transferred across generations. And that's, of course, bad. Now, this is a very crazy experiment conducted by one of the scientists in the 1970s. In the 1970s, experiments on animal models were not so strict. So he did this experiment. First, he trained mice to navigate around a maze. Okay? And he tortured them. And then he took these mice that he trained and decapitated them, of course, kept the head. And then he took the brains and the livers, created a homogenate. Homogenate means you have water, and now you have a mixture with brain particles and liver particles. And And he took these homogenates and injected them into mice that have not been trained to navigate around the maze. So what happened? The memory was transferred. By injecting the untrained mice with the homogenate of the brain and also of the liver, they acquired the memory without being trained. And they concluded that this is a form of a memory that was non-genetic, and it was rather transferred through stress. So stress could also create a memory that can be transferred. Amazing experiment. If that wasn't crazy enough, take a look at this recent experiment with flatworm. What they did here is that they trained flatworms to navigate around the maze and then get the prize, which is a piece of beef liver. And then they decapitated them. That's where their neurons responsible for memory are formed. What happened next? They grew their heads back and still remembered how to go and get the food. Amazing, huh? Now, some scientists say, no, well, this is probably not a memory that was stored in the neurons or in the genes. Maybe it was a muscle memory. Maybe these flatworms learned how to navigate around the maze and they built a muscle memory around that. So by the time they grew their heads, they can still reach to the food. This is another amazing experiment. It's the transfer of memory. Memories can also be transferred from one member of the same species into another member. There are two snails here. The first one was trained to navigate around the maze, and then it received an electric shock. And then the scientists found out which neurons were turning on when this memory formed. So they took these neurons, they transferred them into the second snail. And that memory of the electric shock was transferred to the second snail, even though that snail was not exposed to the electric shock. And how did they determine that? They determined that by exposing it to electric shock, they found the same reaction, the same response to the electric shock. So memories can be transferred across generations. They can be transferred manually in the lab. They can be growing back, as you have seen with the flatworms, but they can also be manipulated. Here, what scientists do basically is that they try to find out which memory, which neurons are responsible for a certain memory. Because if you look into the human brain, these neurons turn on, they flash light. Okay? And they determine which ones are they. Then they genetically engineer them to respond to laser or light. So when you flash light into these neurons that are genetically engineered, they turn on, which means they can turn on a memory now. Yeah? And so what they do is that they take first mice, they train them to remember something, and they find out which neurons are responsible for this, and then they transfer these neurons after, they genetically engineer them. And now they transfer them into mice that have not been exposed to the same memory. And so when you now flash light into these neurons, the mouse will start remembering something that it hasn't experienced. So that's amazing. So what can we do with such stuff? What can we learn from these experiments? We can learn that this has a lot of applications. Now, if you look into people who have depression, most of the time they have negative thoughts in their mind. Now imagine if we can enhance their positive thoughts. Now they will have memories that did not happen to them, but it's probably less evil than committing suicide. So this is one of the future applications of memory manipulation. The second one is simulated memories. Would you rather pay verification, maybe 2,000 dinar, I guess, now that I know that dinar costs more than euros. So would you pay 2,000 to actually go for a vacation, experience it yourself, or maybe 50 dinar to get that memory implanted into your head and just remember it as if it actually happened? It's a crazy future, right? But it could happen. With these experiments, we are really heading into such future. Behavioral implants. If you notice, prisoners spend a lot of time in prison, which cost the government a lot of money. Yeah? Now, what if we can induce behavioral changes in their brain by manipulating their minds? Another interesting application for memory manipulation. And finally, memory restoration. There are many lost memories in your childhood that you don't remember, or some lost memories because of traumatic experiences that are now taking over, because when you don't call the old memories, new ones take over, you lose the old ones, basically. Also, when you remember a certain memory, you don't remember the original one, you remember the last time you remembered it. So after some time, this memory gets distorted and it goes to the trash. It's lost. But with such experiment, we're heading towards a future where we could keep our distant memories intact in the brain. And these are some of the remarkable applications of memory manipulation, which I wanted to introduce you to. Thank you.